Welcome back to another episode of Performance Talk with Wolfpack Performance and, of course, BRYSON, SULLIVAN, the Formula One mind, and Wolfpack fam. Definitely thank him for coming back by, and we're going to give him his flowers, as BRYSON himself was on Sky Sports after the Miami GP this past weekend. So, BRYSON, I want to give you respect, give your flowers, man. Give us a little bit of your experience, man. Tell us how you felt about all that going down. Tell us how it was for you actually being in that place, because I know you sat there plenty of times and you've watched hundreds of Formula One races and you've seen these people, but now you were part of that whole event. So how did you feel about that?
Yeah, thank you for having me on. I think that was kind of an interesting development. It wasn't something that I reached out to them about. They reached out to me and were interested in hearing an American's perspective on the Miami GP and how it worked. When they actually reached out to me, I wasn't even planning on going to the race. I at the time that they reached out to me, I was actually planning on recording that episode, from here where I live. And
Okay.
then after that time, it actually became possible for me to attend the race in person. And that actually made the discussion quite a bit more interesting, being able to give them my feedback and contribute to the discussion while actually have being gone to the race. That was actually quite cool. But yeah, I mean, I'm always happy to contribute to the discussion if people are interested in what I have to say.
Right.
As I say, I'm not an expert in any global sense, but if I can
Okay.
contribute to the conversation and I have insights someone else maybe might not have, where I might approach things in a different way, people seem
That's
to be
true.
very responsive to that, and I certainly am doing all I can to learn what I can and to comment on what I do see. It's been a lot of fun time recently. I can't lie.
It- so man, actually being down there, inaugural Miami GP, everything's going on. First, we get some developments on the track. They had some minor track repair. But what I want to ask you about, well, first I'll say how I feel. I heard there were clamor of people not liking the track for one, two, considering that the track should be changed. And I think the combination turns of 14, 15, and 16, I don't think the track should be touched. But you were there. So what are your thoughts on the track being modified or adjusted before the next Grand Prix comes to Miami?
I mean, I definitely think that work could and should be done on the general quality of the track surface, right?
Okay.
I don't think it's as simple a case as, oh, someone just didn't know what they were doing, or it was just some sort of inferior laying of the asphalt or anything else like that. I think there are some specific factors going on that resulted in the track surface they built being kind of deviant from what they were expecting to see. And it
Okay.
resulted in being a very low grip surface offline, which actually could make things quite interesting for a race
Right.
if you're trying to pass someone and suddenly the braking zone is 35% longer than you're expecting. So that's part of an interesting thing. As far as the circuit design, my understanding is that the circuit designers were deliberately trying to create a track that was difficult to set your car up for. Right. So if you want to have a lot of flowing high speed corners in the first section and some very, very slow, low speed corners in the final section, that can actually make it very difficult to set up your car for that particular track.
Right.
Where do you want to gain the lap time? Do you want to gain the lap time and sort of barreling through curves, or do you want to do it in the high speed? So I think that's actually quite interesting. It's also true that that particular part of the track, given its proximity to the turnpike and the highway that's there simply isn't a lot of runoff area that you could have for a
Mm.
high speed corner. The lower the speed of the cars in that section of the track, the better it is, generally speaking, especially when you have an overpass right there. You don't want to
Yeah.
have very high speed part of the track with an overpass. So um, it is quite interesting. The 2022 cars are quite, ponderous to that part of the section. But as I said in my other discussions, Formula One cars, they actually make like boring corners interesting. When you actually see them in person, corners that are ostensibly boring and just waiting for the next corner are actually pretty lively when you're standing next to them, watching F1 car through there. So I think that, as I said before, motorsports is not a deterministic exercise.
Okay.
You can't just give the input conditions, crank the handle and spit out the conditions, and it'll be the same every time. There are unknown and certainly uncontrolled random factors that result in having a good race or a bad race. We
Okay.
certainly need 2 or 3 iterations of this to kind of see what we might want to improve or change in the future. Certainly, rain could be a factor as well. It wasn't a factor this time, but it could be in the
Yeah.
future. I definitely think that there's a lot of potential in this venue. I'm very curious to see it realized in the future.
Now, that's an interesting point that you brought up before I get to the point I was initially going to bring up before you said rain. Now, like I told people on several of my videos, like, do not get it be fooled. Miami is known for like sporadic rain just to come at no point in time and then it just goes. How was it as far as it raining and then the track actually clearing up? Like, what was the duration of that? Because, other tracks, it can rain and it's going to take a while for dry patches to start developing. And then teams decide whether they want to go to slicks or stay on inners or whatever the case was. How was this track post the rain that dropped down there? Because it was a little bit of rain.
Yeah, I remember on Saturday before qualifying, the clouds were definitely full of rain, and they may have rained a little bit, but they didn't really have anything to interact with qualifying.
Okay.
Before the race, though, they did come down a little bit. Not quite that much, but it definitely was enough for me to like seek shelter for a second before I was trying to figure out where I had to go. But the thing is, it was so hot the past couple of days, and there was so much sun. Realistically speaking, even if there was rain, it would just sort of boil off the track surface relatively quickly.
Okay.
I imagine in an actual race situation, the type of rain that we saw in Miami that weekend would not actually be enough to justify coming in for inters, because by the time that you pitted and then took the penalty for that and then actually sort of drove a few laps on the inters, that would have been completely gone and you would have wasted time. So it's certainly a degree of variability that we didn't quite see play out in the races directly, but I'm curious to see in the future. One thing I will say is that both on Friday night and on Saturday night, it rained a lot around the circuit. And that actually did a lot towards removing the rubber that may have been laid down in those
I heard
first 2
about
days.
that.
So that is something to consider.
All right. So in this case, Norris would have been right. The time he chose not to come in and go on wets, he probably would have been straight this time around.
Yeah, Miami is a little bit different than Sochi. Yeah,
Right.
that's a little different.
Oh man, there was a DRS zone that was just kind of awkward to me where it just started where it was a straight, wasn't it? Where you initiated DRS partially through the straight. Why do you feel, or if you may know, why they did not just make that entire straight a little bit lengthier on DRS?
Probably because the straight's too long. And
Okay.
if you had activated DRS right at the beginning, you would have been well and truly past the car you were fighting before you ever got to the braking zone. Typically, the DRS zone is limited by the ideal situation is for the cars to be side by side at the apex. That's really what you want.
Okay.
If the DRS zone is too long, they won't be able to get side by, or too short, they won't be able to get side by side. And if the DRS is too long, the pass will already be completed before they get there. So you really have to kind of gauge this, and this is made even more complicated by the fact that each team has its own top speed characteristic.
Right.
It's very different for like a Ferrari versus an AlphaTauri versus like a Red Bull versus like a Mercedes. Those are totally different top speed characteristics, and you have to have one DRS zone for all of them. So it's kind of a guessing game to figure out what the best solution is. It wouldn't surprise me if they use the information from this race to adjust DRS zones in the future, but I was mostly happy with it.
You were okay. All right. So we recently got this post came about, Ferrari and Monza. What do you think Ferrari has cooking? Now, I did see some pictures of end plate, which looked different to me. I saw one end plate looked a little shorter than the other end plate. But what do you think they have cooking like? Do you think that they're feeling a little bit of pressure given these last two races haven't really went their way? What do you think's going on with Ferrari?
Well, I think Ferrari is having to grapple with the reality that Mercedes and other teams have been dealing with regard to Red Bull. Red Bull as a team has been one of the best teams at developing their car over the course of a season.
Facts.
They don't often start off a season with a competitive car. I mean, they have this year, but they historically haven't done that. But they've always been good at developing their car over the course of the season. And so it wouldn't surprise me at all if Ferrari was making some moves or at least laying the groundwork for some major upgrades. Now, to be clear, every team will bring major upgrades to Barcelona. That's we knew that from the beginning of preseason testing. There was always going to be upgrades there. But it seems to me like, and especially after looking at some of the data traces after Miami, Ferrari does have a top speed deficit to Red Bull, but it wasn't quite as bad in Miami as I was expecting it to be. There were races in the past where, Ferrari's been in the lower third of the speed trap reliably, but they were just so mighty in the slow speed stuff and under braking that it really didn't matter. I imagine that they were making some modifications to the car at Miami to make it a little bit more slippery to adjust with the high speed. I suspect that if Ferrari can shed a little bit of the drag that they have while not losing too much downforce, that will really benefit them a lot. And I'm not sure how exactly they're going to do that. Typically, the biggest bang for your buck comes from rear wing design. The rear wing creates a ton of downforce, but it also makes like a lot of
A
drag.
lot of drag.
I've seen maybe one or two variations of their rear wing, but I haven't seen one that's anything like as low profile as the Red Bull's rear wing. So I'm curious to see what they think their options are going forward. But I think Ferrari's going to have something special for Barcelona.
So I do as well. I think they will also have something special, especially given I think Imola they didn't declare any upgrades. This past race in Miami really wasn't nothing to talk right home about. And I think Spain is where they're gonna bring like their real packages they want to bring to upgrade. But how can I say this? People seem to, and you can probably clear this up. People seem to think that Ferrari is doing something that's just out of hand. Like they locked down Monza for a photo op, but are they really locking down Monza to test this car? And is that even something legal that teams should be able to do during the course of the season? Could you clear that up for some people that might not be knowledgeable of that?
Yeah, the testing of not just current cars but previous generation cars is actually very tightly prescribed in the regulations. There are testing days, quote unquote filming days that teams can use to run for I believe 100 kilometers or less. I think it is. And there are some restrictions on what they can and cannot test in those days, but I don't think it's anything that is. I don't think the restrictions from keeping people from prying eyes from looking at the cars is necessarily as big of a deal as some people might think. It's certainly noteworthy. I wouldn't question that at all. But we should also note that Ferrari themselves released an image of their car on their social media going through the first chicane. And while it's true that the specification of the car that they released may not be the only specification they tested that day,
Right.
that certainly is possible. They're going to bring upgrades. We don't have to worry about whether or not they're testing them on this filming day. It certainly would make sense to get a few miles in on something that they're working on, but we know something's coming anyway. We don't have to wonder whether or not it's coming. Something is coming big. I do not envy the job of an Albert Fabregas or Sam Collins in Barcelona. They're going to have to be going through so many different pictures of so many different parts. It's going to make their life quite hard for Tech Talk, but we're going to enjoy it.
All right, man. We got this. We got a cap, team cap. Is Carlos killing this cap, bro? Is he killing Ferrari's cap? I mean, he's wrecked. What he's had 3 thus far? 3 in the
I think Carlos will be. So he did have a big crash during the weekend in Miami,
yes.
or 2 actually. One, he had a pretty recent spin, and then in the other case, he hit the barriers in turn 13, which we should talk about for sure.
Right.
But he did finish the race distance, and that is relative improvement, right? He's making it there.
Right.
Carlos, did beat Charles to the champion in the championship last year. And he certainly views himself as equally deserving of the role of number 1 driver if he's able to perform at the level that he feels he's able to perform at. He certainly does not view himself internally as a number 2 driver, and his desire is to show Ferrari that he is in fact the number 1 driver. But again, what has he done recently? Right? It's only as good as what have you done recently. And it is true that he did make a mistake in Melbourne as he was trying to recover, but even that was in a sense related to 2 very unlucky things. Okay. The first one was in his first qualifying lap, there was a red flag caused by Fernando Alonso, I think it actually was in Q3, and that lap that he was trying to get to, he was meters away from finishing the lap, and the red flag fell. He lost a lap that would have gotten him, P3 instead of where he was, like P10 or whatever it was. And then when he went to set another lap, they couldn't start his car. Ferrari had an issue starting his car,
right.
and he wasn't able to get out until much later than he wanted to. instead of being able to warm up the tires the way he wanted to, he had to really push and settle up immediately. And he had problems with the chicane and kind of had to spin there, which means he started from the back and of the top 10. And then he had the wrong steering wheel on his car. He had a steering wheel problem with his car on the start, and the clutch setting wasn't right. So when he started in Melbourne, he actually had a bad start through no fault of his own. And then we saw how he spun in that race. And then in Imola, he had an issue where Daniel Ricciardo crashed into him entirely to no fault of his own either. So I don't think this.
Didn't he have something in a practice round though?
In Imola? I have to go back and remember, but I the thing that I remember most from Imola is that he was crashed out by Ricciardo.
Yeah, Ricciardo failed to give up the corner, and
I mean, Ricciardo he lost the rear. That 2 seconds of correcting to catch it just put him right into him. But what I would say about Sainz is it's almost like looking at Lewis and his results recently. There's a superficial analysis that you can take from where he's finished and whether he's finished the race. But there's a deeper analysis that you can look at to see what are the actual conditions involved in these particular results. And I think there is evidence to show that Carlos is actually probably a lot closer than people really give him credit for. I'm sure for his psychology, he needs the results of actually finishing in front of Charles and Max and others during the races, and he'll get his first win sooner rather than later. But I think he's demonstrating that having a championship contending car is not enough to be a championship contender.
Okay.
Right. There's a psychological aspect to that. And there's a pressure associated with knowing that you have a competitive car that you just have to, fight through and deliver on. So as far as Carlos goes, Ferrari knows that he's good. That's why he was signed to a contract. The results will come. He just needs to keep pushing.
You saying that it definitely sides with a lot of people's view. I don't have a lot of faith when it comes to teams and contracts with players and our drivers, right? Like the teams are always going to inevitably do what they feel is best for them. And I just never believe a contract is unrippable. You know what I'm saying? I just don't trust them, and I hate it for Carlos because I don't know where Ferrari may sit if they feel like we're right there. But if this does continue, let's say within the next 4 races, Carlos wrecks another 2 Ferraris. Do you don't think Ferrari's mind frame, although Carlos may show potential and talent with the wrecking of 5 Ferraris over the course of almost nearly half a season, you don't think that weighs in on if they really want to keep him? You don't think Ferrari will teeter all on that?
I think it's definitely far too early in a career and in a season to make those kind of assessments. I also think that if I was to imagine a team that probably could handle the cost, it's probably Ferrari, mostly because they just haven't really been that well in the past couple of seasons. They did definitely lock down 3rd position last season. We'll give them credit for that. But in terms of budget wise, I'm not terribly worried about it. Would it be better if the cars weren't damaged? Yes, but it's much less of an issue for them than like Haas, right? When I think of Haas, I mean, I can only imagine the sleepless nights that Gunther Steiner is having after some of these crashes.
Bro, like I feel for him, bro. It's like it just follows him. Like he literally has meetings. He did before, have meetings with his driver. Like just don't wreck the car. I've always told people like there's a sign in Haas that says wrecking is racing. Like when you walk through their door, it's just crazy to me. So I know you mentioned 15. You said you wanted to talk about that. Turn 15. I thought 14 and 15 to me were my favorite sections of the track. I thought it was very challenging the way it was set up. Give me your perspective, your views, your analysis on it.
I really liked it. I think because you kind of have turn 11, which is that hard braking after that long, straight at the bottom part of the track. Then there's this long sort of sweeping right-hander of turn 12. And then it's just like a nice like sprint sort of to this breaking point at turn 13, and then it's that chicane and then the left bit at the end. The drivers were really pushing there, and I think they're going a lot faster at that part of the track than maybe the circuit designers expected. And not only that, but when they were pushing and the cars actually spun and they hit the barrier, the type of barrier that's there seemed to be incongruous with the speed and angle with which they were hitting it. It was just a straight concrete barrier. And not only did Carlos have, physical pain as a remnant from his crash there, but, Ocon, had a cracked chassis when he crashed his car there. And so it's one of the reasons why I was so perturbed by the FIA's response to the drivers there, because it seemed like the FAA was more concerned with the hypothetical danger of like jewelry and things
Right.
versus the clear and present danger of barrier design. And again, I'm not saying that putting Tech Pro there is a perfect solution. It may be the case that the incidence angle is too low and the angles are not right to make Tech Pro work there. But maybe safer barrier would be an appropriate barrier to have there if the incidence angle is low.
Right.
It's just that it certainly is not a discussion that should be dismissed out of hand if two and even three drivers, maybe I think Norris even mentioned something about it, even though he didn't crash there, he understood that, well, maybe there's something to be said here. The idea that that discussion could be dismissed out of hand, or I've even heard someone say, no, we should never change the circuit because of the driver's feedback, because we're just coddling them, and they should be punished for mistakes. There should be some sort of punishment. While I agree that it certainly does make sense to have more punishment than the endless runoff of Paul Ricard or some other circuit like that,
Okay.
we shouldn't be okay with leaving a potentially unsafe barrier precisely because you want to punish someone. You shouldn't have a driver potentially suffering a life-altering injury because you
Right.
want to quote unquote punish them. So if there is going to be a crash, crashing their car and breaking their suspension is punishment enough. We shouldn't impose bodily harm on drivers because
Right.
we want them to not make mistakes. And besides the fact that ignores the reality that even the best drivers in the world make mistakes. Hamilton
Fact.
in Imola 2021, or if you're a Verstappen person, Verstappen at Jeddah in that qualifying crash that he had,
Another one.
or Leclerc at in Imola, spinning
Right.
at the chicane. Even the best drivers make mistakes. Our number one job is to make sure that they can make a mistake and live to tell a story another day.
I firmly believe that.
I'm firmly of the idea that drivers' opinions matter. Their lives are on the line, and frankly, seeing these cars in person, how fast they are, the scale of the energy involved in driving them, just goes to show me how incredibly skillful and courageous these drivers are to drive these beasts of machines.
Hell
I can
yeah.
promise you, I might be able to drive an F1 car for a little bit, but on the limit of grip, could I drive it? I certainly couldn't drive it as well. But my concern of my own ability to drive a car on the limit is very different from just like going around a track in a vehicle.
Facts.
So I mad respect to them and their effort. And if it has something important to say about barriers, we should listen.
Then you know what? I think that is very true, man. I think what you said there, like they should be punished, is all. I think punished is the wrong word. I just think that for somebody to say they should be punished is the wrong word. Like if they're going to be challenged, that's something different. And then if you're challenged, then you're looking at it a punishment. Then, like you said, you are ignoring the ultimate like concern of bodily injury or death, right? Because that is why they have these things here. So if there's a situation where you have these drivers that are, like you said, driving on the edge, bro, like they're trying to push this car to the maximum moment where it's almost out of control, but controllable. Those are death-defying situations every turn, every time they hit the track. If they have a concern, I would not take it lightly because they're Formula One drivers. They're in a dangerous situation. They purposely put themselves in these cars knowing that it's going to be dangerous. So if something has pointed out to them that, yo, this is like out of there, like I think it's need to be looked at, I don't think it should be ignored either. Maybe they're too concerned about swatches, watches, G-Shocks, maybe Audemars. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
What were you thinking about that, bro? Because you were there. So how did you feel? How do you feel about this whole jewelry nonsense to a degree? I do believe in safety. Like I don't think football players should all the time wear loose chains on the field, just a hazard. I don't, so what is your perspective on the jewelry situation? Aside from the most important thing about the safety, like what did you think about that as it was going on?
I feel like I am yet to hear an evidence-based argument for why the types of jewelry that we're talking about, specifically studs in noses and ears, is dangerous. And I am yet to find one example of a crash that was caused by a stud. Right? And moreover, take a horrific example like Romain Grosjean's crash
Right.
in 2020. We know he was wearing his wedding band
right
during the accident. in by no means was that something that further injured him or even prevented rescue personnel from getting to him. If anything, that was the one part of his hand that wasn't burned in the same way that everything else was. And this idea that we have a problem with nose piercings, but wedding bands are okay, or if you have like a religious exemption, it's like, well, is this unsafe or is it not? It is the ultimate question. It shouldn't matter if you have a reason that you think is justifiable based on something else that's not safety consideration. Number one. Number two, we have videographic evidence of W Series drivers wearing studs during their races or practice sessions in Miami, right? Now you would say, okay, well, W Series isn't an FIA series. It's not FIA, blah, blah. It's still governed by the international, drivers license requirements that has the same statement of not having jewelry. It's not fundamentally different. I just feel like it's been described as fans of Lewis or fans of a certain driver dying on a hill or something or posting a flag on something with regard to this jewelry. It's actually the FIA that's choosing to die on a hill. The reality is the FIA has chosen to specifically try to enforce this rule as a means of exerting its influence or exerting its will. I don't know. But you can't make the argument that it's fundamentally based on safety when they didn't even enforce the rule for like years. If it really was a safety issue, why isn't there a litany of crashes caused by jewelry that we can reference and say, well, look, this is clearly a jewelry incident. We should have fixed this rule a long time ago. They just don't exist. I think that what needs to be revisited is not driver behavior. I think more often than not, they're able to figure out what's a reasonable thing and what's not. I think the rule itself needs to be revisited. Instead of saying no jewelry of any kind, there should be some scientific or physiological basis for which types of jewelry make sense. A stud seems to be okay. Now, if you want to rock up like Mr. T, I'm gonna have questions for you. That's gonna be harder to justify. I can definitely see the argument there as to how that could either impair you in operating your machine or make it difficult to extract you. But the type of things we're talking about are the minutia of details here that I just don't think makes any sense. And so whether or not the FIA wants it to be seen as targeting an individual driver, that certainly seems to be the impression. That's not just Lewis's fans who say that, but many other people who are not say that. I think they should reevaluate their position and what they are trying to get out of this particular action. As I said several times, let's talk about circuit and barrier design before jewelry, because that's a real, manifest danger as opposed to the theoretical one of the jewelry.
It is. I totally agree with what you just said. I know that I being, prior military, a veteran, the whole jewelry thing when we're active is something that is just imposed upon you, especially when you see somebody get their wedding ring snagged on a hydraulic line and then the finger just starts coming off. There are certain things like that but I do firmly agree with what you said. Like, I have not heard of one evident piece of evidence the FIA has brought as an example of this is why we are now harping on this. And you're right, it hasn't been. And I do think to me, in my perspective, it is targeting. I mean, I don't know how many people are wearing studs. I don't know how many people wearing nose piercings. I mean, that's pretty damn specific, when you talk about the amount of drivers that we know are involved in this. So I think it's targeting. I think it's cheap. I know there's a notion out there that people are feeling that Lewis is being targeted by not only the FIA, but I mean, he's been targeted by, social media and people, period, because I mean, he's the only black driver in Formula One, and certain people feel a certain way about that, or just the case they think Lewis has been spoon-fed, which is BS in my opinion. And I will be going over that tomorrow. How do you feel about Williams and Latifi? Do you feel that Latifi should be replaced? And if he should be replaced, do you think Williams is in a prime position to bring up Jamie from W Series, properly work through the right channels, and give a woman their opportunity in Formula One? Do you think Williams is if any team is best positioned to give that opportunity to somebody, do you think it's Williams in the place of Latifi?
Jamie, someone who actually had 2 seconds to meet briefly in Miami. I waved to her. She waved back, and she was also on the she was also on the Sky Sports show after my segment was over on Any Driven Monday. She needs a spot in Formula 2 is
Yes.
really what she needs, because the jump from any sort of F3 series, FIA, F3 or otherwise, to Formula 2 itself is massive. And then the jump from F2 to F1 is equally massive, if not more massive, because there's just no comparison to Formula 1, really anything. So what I really would like to see is definitely Jamie working in getting a spot in Formula 2. The fact that she's won W Series twice and has no spot in Formula 2 is already a problem. There should be, and people make this false analogy like, well, she's not good enough yet to beat the best person in Formula 2, and she can't beat them in the first season, so why should she be there, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, first of all, you don't know that. Secondly, she's certainly good enough to replace the worst driver in Formula 2.
Thank you, bro.
Right? We're not talking about the requirement of the perfect situation and how you just you just need to crack the door open is really all you need. And it certainly is not beyond the realm of possibility to see her there. Now, with regard to Latifi, here's the thing about Latifi. Every single driver on the grid in Formula 1 is the 1% of the 1% of the 1% of all drivers in the world. Nicholas Latifi will dominate any normal person in a racing car. It's just that he is in the preeminent racing series in the world, and he is in a situation where not only is he having difficulty adapting to the 2022 cars, but he's had someone who's completely new to the team, also completely new to the cars, come in and comprehensively beat him. Right? That is a situation where it's just not sustainable long term. It doesn't help if you crash either. So there's two factors to this. One of them is, how much money are you bringing to the team, and do they need that money to survive? And if you're bringing money to the team and they need it to survive and you're helping them do that, your spot is secure. How you perform with regard to your teammate is important for future progress. But at the end of the day, if they need the money, then they need the money. The problem is we're in a cost cap era now, right? Every single dollar matters, and it matters more to the smaller teams than it does to the bigger teams. If you are crashing your car as frequently as not crashing it, suddenly the money you bring to the team doesn't actually matter as much, because you're costing just as much as you're bringing. Right. So even if his pure performances would be average or middling, that actually might not be the deciding factor in whether or not he stays. It actually may be purely down to cost, because it's not just a question of like, oh, do we have enough spares left to run this race or run two different configurations of downforce over the weekend. It's like, can we even bring parts to the next race type of stuff? This is the cost cap. This is what it means. So I definitely think that the rumors that have been floating around that he's already replaced are probably not accurate. I've seen one person say that and they immediately kind of backtracked. So I don't think we have to worry about a mid-season swap necessarily. But the idea that he will definitely be on the grid next year is something I would seriously question. I think that Williams could very easily strike a deal with Oscar Piastri.
I was about to say Piastri.
Alpine, or depending on how Logan Sargent does this year in F2, maybe even he could actually be a person to have in Williams. And let's not forget, he is an American. And he's from the US as well. So I think that, I'm not sure if he'll be ready by the end of the season, but it's certainly nothing to completely disregard. So as far as Nicholas Latifi goes,
it's almost job security at Williams, because of where Williams is. It's like job security, because I don't know if Albon will be there next season.
Where would you see him? AlphaTauri or something?
Yep.
Well, how would that work?
AlphaTauri, or maybe, I don't know, depending on what Alonso's contract runs out this year.
Yeah, but it seems like Alonso is enough of a draw for the team and has enough of an influence that he'll be able to drive however long he wants to. I think this past race in Miami actually is evidence that he would actually, I'm not saying it's an age thing necessarily, but there were certainly some moves in Miami that were clumsy, for lack of a better word. And if that gets worse or becomes more of a thing in the future, maybe his seat won't be quite as secure. But frankly, right now, I think he's enough of a draw for so many people still that he could probably drive as long as he wants to.
Okay. What about Joe?
Joe seemed pretty cool. I actually met him too in Miami
That's right,
for a
because you were
second.
around Alfa Romeo,
Yeah,
right? Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to go to an Alfa Romeo event on Miami Beach and wish the drivers luck in first person. Joe seems to be okay. I think he was unlucky with a mechanical retirement in Miami,
Yeah,
if
he
I
did
recall
get that.
correctly. It's his first season in Formula One. It was always gonna be difficult. Valtteri is, really loving life at the moment, having an opportunity to be a bona fide number one driver in a team,
Right.
and the removal of the expectations of having to win every race and yada yada. He's having a great time.
Right.
That will always be a difficult person to beat. And let's not forget, Valtteri Bottas was always good. Right? The people who always love to say that Valtteri wasn't good, most of the time that was sort of a veiled attempt to say that Lewis is not good for beating him, right? Because people wanted to say that, of course, Valtteri's not good. This is beating him. He's not that great.
He's not that good. Valtteri sucks.
The reality is Valtteri is always good. Lewis has also just been.
I mean, he did well in Miami, bro.
He did, and I'm taking credit for that. I'm taking credit for that because I told Valtteri, I shook his because I'm still weird about taking selfies. So instead of taking a selfie, I shook his hand and I said, "Have a great race." And I like did one of these. So as far as I'm concerned,
like right on.
As far as I'm concerned, I'm his good luck charm, and we're gonna test that hypothesis in about a month.
Okay.
Because as you know, things have changed rather quickly since that Sky interview, through a series of events that I can't give all the details of yet.
Respect.
It actually is the case that I will in fact be in Montreal for the Canadian Grand Prix in about a month. So that is not exactly first to be revealed here. I think there may have been someone else I told before, but it is actually news that I will be in Canada in about a month for the Canadian Grand Prix. So
congratulations, bro. I told you belong there, bro. Like,
no. I'm not saying I'm going to be doing punditry for Sky.
This is what I'm saying. This is what I'm saying. Everybody, don't hold Bryson to this. Bryson's not doing this. I'm stepping in front of this bullet for Bryson. I'm going to take this bullet with a Kevlar vest. Bryson belongs somewhere in the Formula One universe. Period. Period. He is well talented, qualified. You belong there, bro. So you don't have to say it. So they can just come see me when it's said and they feel like it ain't right. They can come see JP over here, Wolfpack. I'll take the bullet for that. But I will very much, talent, bro.
I will very much enjoy going to that track. I've never been to the track before, but it's very famous and important to me. It was Lewis Hamilton's first victory. It was in Montreal in 2007. It's a track he loves. I can try to imagine, Lewis finally getting back to one of his favorite tracks in the world and going through a difficult time with Mercedes, but finally getting that first win. Man. Could you imagine the scenes? It would be incredible.
Bro, I'm just waiting to pop this thing for
I'm just waiting. Look, I think there are parallels to draw between what Mercedes is going through in this year and what McLaren went through in 2009. And even then, when they built a car that was, by Lewis's own admission, the worst car he's ever driven, they still were able to develop it over the course of the season. They were still able to win, multiple races. I don't see any reason why something like that couldn't happen this year. And in fact, it's not a coincidence that year when she had one of the worst cars he's ever driven was the immediate consequence of a major regulation change based on overtaking and improving overtaking. It's the same story again. If anything, it's a measure of how great Lewis has been and how long he's been in the game. He's actually been so good for so long. He's been able to be set back by 2 different regulation changes. And that's incredible. Most people don't even last in the sport long enough for that to happen, let alone be successful.
Right.
So I have no doubt that Mercedes and Lewis and the team, and especially with George, are in a position where they are learning every day. And when it does finally come good, I would watch out. They're going to be quite dangerous.
So what do you think that you saw enough indication in Miami? Because I remember Toto saying that this is not going to be a race that's going to define us getting over the hump entirely. But I'm paraphrasing. But basically, this is going to be a race that is going to give us some indication if we're going in the right direction. Do you
Mhm.
think you saw an indication that Mercedes is at least headed in the right direction?
I think so, and I think there's two things to separate here, right? One of them
Okay.
is generic car specific changes to setup, and the other one is track specific changes for a high speed, low drag configuration. I think
Okay.
you know the rear, the beam wing and the rear wing, and even certain elements of the front wing, you could argue are track specific changes, right, to minimize drag, but also at the same time, you know, some of those things could also apply to Barcelona and other tracks. I think the biggest question is how much porpoising did we see, and how bad was it? I personally, it didn't seem to be that bad to me at all. It certainly was better than Imola, from what I
Oh,
saw. Not
yeah.
only from what I saw from the television screens, but also what I saw from on the run down to turn 11 on the south side of the circuit. You know, there are gaps in the wall for the cranes to go through, and if
Okay.
you're looking at the right exact location, you can actually see the cars completely unobstructed. That's one of the things people don't get by going to F1 races. Under almost all situations, you're looking through fences to see the cars.
Yes.
In very, very rare cases, you can see them without fences at ground level, and that's
Unrestricted
exactly
view.
where you did. The cars look pretty good. So I think that they certainly are learning something. I think that whatever they have learned, it's been difficult to bring upgrades specifically to address things up to this point because everything's been essentially a flyaway. And if you think about something as massive and as detailed as a floor, for
Hmm.
instance, right? Those things take an incredibly long time to build and to make sure that they're working properly, and to just fly out places. Barcelona might be the first time we actually start seeing some new floors from some of the cars.
Oh,
So keep that in mind. And also, as I mentioned before, porpoising is an aeromechanical problem. It
yes.
has aerodynamic and mechanical causes, but that therefore it means it has aerodynamic and mechanical solutions as well. I wouldn't be surprised if there might be some changes to some of the team's suspensions as well in Barcelona, on top of any aero upgrades.
Now, with you mentioning the suspensions, like we already know certain devices have been out regulated out for this season, J dampeners and such. So what can they do to suspensions that will allow them to maybe impose some type of mechanical correction? We already know about the aero, but what are some of the options they have for these suspension solutions?
What I tend to think about is the suspension geometry with regard to the rockers,
Okay.
right? And the length of the arms on the rockers and potentially what the range of motion is. So even if you have like a 30-degree range of motion from wheels all the way down to wheels all the way up in terms of the rocker motion,
Okay.
that's a difference. That's difference between like 30 to like 90 to 60 degrees versus like 60 to 30 degrees.
Okay.
Like if it's still a 30-degree range of motion, depending on where that occurs in one overall turn, it may have a difference in terms of how easy it is to damp out oscillations at a particular part of the travel. It
Okay.
seems I remember talking to Craig Scarborough about this and trying to get a flavor of what exactly the teams are struggling with this porpoising issue. And it seems to be that the suspension damping characteristics are quite different at the lowest extreme of the car ride height versus at the normal higher ride heights. And I can understand that by drawing some
Yeah.
pictures, it'll be a little bit difficult. But I bought into this idea that the ability for the suspension to dampen out oscillations could itself be a function of ride height, and it's really
Okay.
the lower ones that we have to deal with. And it's not just as simple as making the spring stronger, because making the spring stronger just means that there's more energy that it's going to be bouncing
Right.
around,
Yeah.
and it also makes it much harder to handle the car in the slow speed stuff. So I think that there's definitely things that they're dealing with. I'm not sure exactly what they will change, but if I get any opportunity, I will ask somebody. Believe me.
Okay. But do you think the whole, because there's a narrative out there this it definitely starting to become a groundswell as to why don't they just go back to the side pod design of Barcelona? Why won't they just go back? For me, I just don't think Mercedes is about going back. Like I think at this point in time, Mercedes, they would choose to, and and you can correct me if you're wrong, if you feel that I'm wrong, because you've been much more abreast of situation, especially with your mind and engineering. I just feel that as a person, in my opinion, that Mercedes is not about going backwards. I think they will choose to salvage what they need in order to go forward in 2023 before they decide to go backwards as far as a side pod design and lose time on gathering any information and data they can to perfect the design they want to go forward with? What do you think?
My contention with this current side pod design has always been the theoretical gain in lap time for this design is something like 1.5 seconds if it actually works correctly. That's always been what their contention has been. But they've been hampered by porpoising in a way that's really made it impossible. My contention has always been get this concept to a point where it doesn't have any porpoising problems at all. Evaluate what the performance of that is. If you're still 7/10 behind the competition, give up on it.
Okay.
Right? I don't have any problem giving up on a concept because our simulations don't match reality. That happens all the time. There's nothing wrong with that or problematic with that. The issue that I have with this narrative of just go back to the other side pods is it's really two things, and they're very important. Number one, the Barcelona preseason test specification of the W13 with traditional side pods had porpoising. It did. It had porpoising. We weren't talking about it that much, and we didn't have that much of a focus on it because all the teams were having porpoising, and we didn't even know a different side pod configuration was coming. But that previous side pod specification still had porpoising, right? Number one. Number two, other cars with more traditional side pod designs, Haas and Alpine, and especially Ferrari, those cars with much more traditional side pod designs have porpoising. Sometimes worse than Mercedes.
Worse than Mercedes.
Especially if you looked at Ferrari and Haas in Australia. It was definitely worse than Mercedes. So this idea that they have a radical side pod design concept and it's causing porpoising, and let's just go back to the old one, that'll fix it, is empirically false because we already know that the specification of the car that they were running previously still had porpoising. Whatever the core issue is, it will not be solved by something as simple as just use the previous specification side pods. Now, that being said, I'm not saying that the current side pod design isn't contributing to the problem. That it's not a contributing factor. It very well may be. But it certainly is not the case that it will be eliminated by going to a previous side pod design. Not only that, the teams have had several weeks since the beginning of the season to look at other teams, to look at their own concepts, to evaluate contingency plans. If we do go to a different side pod concept, it actually isn't even going to be what was shown in Barcelona. They will have learned something in the intervening time and had a new version of it that they would actually bring out to maximize performance. So none of this is standing still. Everything that's happening here is highly fluid. As I've always said, my acid test for whether or not the zero pod side pod concept could or should work is if you're being hampered by porpoising currently and you're able to eventually solve the porpoising problem completely, when you do that and you still run this car and it's still 7/10 off the pace, can it? Right? There's nothing wrong with looking at a design and saying, for whatever reason, our tools told us something that didn't manifest itself in reality. There's nothing wrong with that. What's wrong is, sunk cost fallacy, sticking to something longer than you need to when the evidence tells you it's time to move on. I don't think we're at that point yet, but I can imagine a time where we do get to that point. And I've already mentioned before what the test for that should be.
Okay. So what do you think about I feel that now I know that there are some safety cars that have played a part. I feel like there's some disconnect as far as the strategies for Lewis's team, their strategies. What do you think is going on there? Like, what is happening? Some people I know everybody is just raving and wanting to rave about Lewis just not being great, and now Russell's in front of him. It's just crazy to me. It's like, Bryson, I really don't get it. It's like nothing is as it should be when it comes to Lewis. Like, the man's a 7-time world champion, but that doesn't matter. It was always the car. Well, I would beg to differ. Like, Max didn't start improving until he got to Red Bull. If you go back and look, he improved in position, he improved in pace. Like, so does the same rules not apply to Max? Do the same rules not apply to anybody? Like, is there a combination? But when it comes to Lewis, everybody's like, it's Lewis against damn near Formula One, FIA, and the world sports circuit. So what do you think the issue is are going on? Or is there even an issue with the strategies in your opinion?
Regarding all of this noise about Lewis Hamilton and George Russell, I've been reliably informed by my physician that listening to loud incongruous noises for a long period of time is bad for your health.
Right.
So I just ignore all of that. Okay, I just ignore all of that. It's clearly nonsense, and it's so self-evident that it's nonsense that it doesn't even require a rebuttal. If people took literally 3 seconds, I'm not even joking, literally 3 seconds to just do simple math and say, in how many circumstances this year has George Russell pitted under a safety car or a virtual safety car and jumped positions or gotten a tire advantage as a result?
Mm-hmm.
It's like 4. It's like at least 3, arguably 4, at least 3. That is incredibly unlucky on Lewis's side, but it's a factual statement. It's not a question of, oh, Lewis is falling off and all this other stuff. I mean, people are salivating at the prospect of Lewis being bad. The thing is, the fantasy, I'm going to call it a fantasy, that's what it is.
Right.
The fantasy that many people have that Lewis Hamilton was never great, that he was only this incredibly lucky, incredibly fortunate person to just be plopped into the best car every time, and as soon as anyone competent comes, he'll be beaten, yada yada yada. It's just nonsense. You don't listen to it because these people are not making their statements based on facts. They're making them based on being uncomfortable with a certain type of person being the greatest of all time. Let's not pretend. That's what the problem is. They have a problem with this particular person having the cachet and status of being the greatest ever.
Right.
And any opportunity that they have to bring that person down, they don't hesitate. So don't worry about them. As far as the strategy goes, it's an interesting question. I think the drivers themselves are often best placed to make statements about what they're expecting to see and hear and what the strategy is. For Lewis to say, not only in the actual team radio, which I listened to, but also in his media statements, he didn't feel he was in the position to have the knowledge he needed to make a decision of whether to pit or not. That's entirely between him and the team. If that's something that he feels the team can improve on, I suspect he's probably right about that. But that's an internal matter. I'm not going to second and triple guess the decisions that they're making with regard to one driver or another. What I will say is that George Russell did not have a great qualifying in Miami. And when you don't have a great qualifying, it always will make sense to take the counter strategy, which is, start on a harder tire. You're going to lose some positions on the start because you have no grip. And I think he was, 16th or 17th at one point during the first lap.
Come time to pit.
But it gives you the opportunity you can either pit on your normal time, or if the tires are holding on, you can extend and just extend, just in case there happens to be a safety car. You can take maximum advantage of it. And then even if there isn't a safety car, extending gives you much fresher tires at the end. You're much closer in the beginning of the wear window. So that will always benefit you if you can do it. And as I said, there happened to be a safety car which you could take advantage of. One thing that we do need to talk about, though, is that incident between Norris and Gasly is noteworthy to me, not only because we had another tire escape the wheel rim in a crash, which is a relatively low speed crash, mind you. I know we had a high speed incident at Cops in 2021 where a wheel came off, but these are low speed incidents. I think that we're starting to get to the point where we're seeing enough data to suggest that the new wheels and tire combinations are a bit easier to separate than the previous versions. And my hypothesis for the mechanism of that is the bigger old balloon tire sidewalls can absorb energy by deflecting. The energy that they used to absorb with the large sidewalls is now being put directly into the bead of the tire, into the wheel rim. And if that can't sustain the forces, then it's going to come off. That doesn't really seem like all that surprising to me. It's not a problem yet, but it's something to keep in mind. But what I really want to talk about with Gasly and Norris is I don't think it was a simple case of Gasly just not paying attention. I think that if you were starting to have drivers feel the effects of the sweltering heat in Miami and dealing with the many effects that they were dealing with and strategy and who's in your pit window and all these things, if you were to start having any kind of driver physiological impact, you would start seeing it at the end of the race. And I genuinely think that him going offline and having to wait for 2 or 3 cars to go by, and then Norris to go by, maybe it actually could be related to just the exhaustion factor. We know that several drivers either didn't have drink because their drink button wasn't working, or teams deliberately chose not to give them drink to save weight. They
Wait,
were all exhausted after the race. I remember the cool down room, no one was even talking for like a minute and a half because they were just so exhausted from the heat. So I definitely think that in the future, this race could potentially benefit from being either a twilight race or a night race. I
okay,
have personal stories from people who saw people faint and collapse from dehydration. Some people were
bro.
airlifted away from the track because of the heat. I feel like, and don't get me wrong, there are plenty of hydration stations and water available, but
Right, but if you're
it
not
was
used to that
just
heat, Miami, bro,
it
it's
was
gonna
just
be
it
on you.
was just very very hot. So I think that there's definitely the possibility of running this race at a either an earlier time in the year, right,
Okay,
or a
yeah.
later time in the day that would actually make it a little bit better.
I completely agree. And I was telling people that when we were talking about going into Miami, like, yo, the heat down, if you've never been down south, the heat in Florida is just extremely different. It's thick, it's humid, and it's like you're in a sauna, bro. So if you've never been in that environment, then you have to imagine somebody in a Formula One car basically sitting on a damn engine. It's crazy. Like that for your body to endure that, then have to be at peak condition to turn these corners, to come in and out, to be aware of cars around you. That's a task, bro. That's a daunting task for a human body in any circumstances.
Yeah, I knew it was too hot when I realized I was rationing water.
Oh my
Like
god.
because when I go to a track, I have to see the cars from every corner.
Okay.
I walk to every corner of the track during the Grand Prix and see the cars from every corner. And at some point, I realized, okay, like how much water do I have left? Okay, where do I have to go? Where can I get to the next water? It was just a deal.
He's
And
plan
and
logistically
again,
planning water stops.
it was a great event in terms of all the regalia and festivities and things that were around and all the activities. I had a great time there. I just feel like there are a couple of tweaks that we could do. And as I said before, motorsport is not a deterministic enterprise.
Okay,
It takes a couple of times, a couple of goes to get a distribution of what the possible outcomes are. And I certainly
true,
think it's earned its right to have more Grand Prix for sure.
true. Okay, all right. So how do you view the new? Do you think the new team combination with Russell and Lewis? Do you think it would have been better to keep Valtteri? In my opinion, if I'm looking at it like a business, no, I don't think so. In your opinion, what do you think?
No, I think this was the right move, and I think it was the right time. Not only was it the right time because Valtteri himself realized that he was not going to beat Lewis Hamilton reliably over the course of a season. Like he recognized it himself that he was not going to find the success he wanted in Mercedes with Lewis Hamilton there. It gave him the opportunity to go to a different team and be the best version of himself. And also, George Russell had been waiting for 3 years for a shot at Mercedes.
Yeah.
And I think that what people need to understand about George Russell is people kind of view him as like the new Valtteri or a new driver. It's like Valtteri. That's fundamentally incorrect.
Thank you.
Valtteri was always a second driver to Lewis at Mercedes. The reality is Mercedes views George Russell as a number one driver in training, right?
Mhm.
Which is a very different
Different.
prospect than a number two driver. George Russell, and again, George Russell's resume is actually pretty outstanding if you see who he's beaten in his time. But he's always been viewed as number one driver in training, and there's no person to get better training from than a seven-time, really
The GOAT.
8 times world champion Lewis Hamilton.
Right.
And not only that, there's no better bar to measure yourself against. So it's always been the case for them. And if Mercedes didn't act on George soon, he was going to be available for someone else to snap him up, either
For
Red Bull
real.
or maybe even Ferrari if they were
Ferrari.
feeling, adventurous. So they had to make a move, and I think it actually worked out the best for all parties. Personally, I think that if if the Mercedes W13 was a more competitive package, I would argue that Mercedes has the best driver pairing on the grid. Actually, I
I
rate
think
George
so.
Russell very highly,
I
and
do
I don't
too.
think it's just because of his qualifying performances. I think he really does have what it takes to go wheel to wheel with some of these other drivers in the same car and beat them. He just needs an opportunity. And regarding Lewis, Lewis has always been the X factor. There will come a time when his age just catch up to him, but I think we're still quite far from that.
I do too.
I think if you give Lewis a bad car, he can compete. if you give Lewis a competitive car, he can win.
Facts.
You just need to give him a car he can fight with, and I'm confident the team is working on that right now.
Man. Okay. Vegas. Vegas will be coming up next year. What do you foresee for the Vegas Grand Prix? What do you foresee as the driving ability, the track setup compared to Miami?
Mm,
What would you expect being in Miami, thinking about Vegas? Vegas is also in the desert, but a very much different heat. I think Vegas also chose to do a night race. If I'm not mistaken, it's
it is.
projected to do
It is
so.
a night race, and it's going to be on Saturday too, which is a little different.
Different, right?
I think that the city setting of Las Vegas will be very spectacular. There may be a dearth of high speed corners, flowing corners that I would like. It will be much more of a traditional street track than Miami is. Miami is classified as a street track, but it doesn't feel or look like a street track when you're out there.
Okay.
It's just a beautiful campus and it looks amazing. The corners are great. The barriers are quite close in certain areas, which we agree, but you know it's a wonderful circuit that I think integrates very well with the Hard Rock existing infrastructure. As far as Las Vegas goes, I hope that Formula One learns a little bit more about the United States, and indeed, the United States learns more about Formula One through this exercise of the Miami Grand Prix. It's quite clear that the U.S. and Formula One are quite fond of one another.
Okay.
Right. But I just don't believe that either fully understands the other just yet. I mean, I, for one, as an American, didn't need to see football helmets on the podium. You know, I didn't need to see a police escort, you know, with motorcycles going to the podium. If that's not for me, who is it for? Right. Who is asking for this? What American is saying, I will not accept Formula One without football helmets? And that doesn't make any sense.
Right.
I think there is a caricature of America that Formula One has come to accept as reality that really doesn't reflect the true state of things. And I feel like if they want to be successful, there needs to be one or two iterations of that. I also think that if Formula One wants to be successful in the United States, it cannot be seen as the enemy of local residents. And I'm talking specifically about Miami Gardens.
With the Garden City.
If local residents are fearful or apprehensive of a 10-year deal with Miami, the best way to combat fear is with accurate information. It's not steamrolling local residents. It's not ignoring their concerns. It's listening to them and trying to address them with facts. The facts will always help you more so than anything else. As I said before, it's not enough to win your case in a court of law. You have to win in a court of public opinion as well. And so I feel like Formula One and Miami Gardens have the potential to have a very harmonious relationship. It just needs more work than I've seen currently. If I can even be involved in helping facilitate that, I will. But if Formula One believes that it can just sweep this under the rug and never talk about it again, they're mistaken.
That's a mistake.
The U.S. is not like other countries.
No,
you know, we'll find out about everything. And if Formula One is seen to be an enemy of the people, it really will not be successful.
Bro, I'm glad you brought that because I did a whole video on that, and I just thought Formula One did a very lackluster attempt, if any attempt was ever made, to ingratiate themselves with the local community. And a lot of this could have been avoided. I felt that had Formula One thought about this and went in to invite and basically, you know, saying introduce themselves correctly to the community, it could have been. Now the community is involved with Formula One, and fans, that people that may not have even known about Formula One might know about it and be a little bit more accepting when you come there. And I thought that was the wrong way to go about it. Like, it's at the end of the day, I know it's business, and you know the big wigs will make things turn and palms will get greased or whatever the case may be, and the events will happen, and then you will have unhappy people that will be living there and there when you return there. And I think you made a valid point on that, so I won't go any further because you eloquently put it. As
what I will say is that Formula One is trying, right? They certainly have invited local vendors to have food at the event, and they've had local outreach programs to schools and focus on STEM and things. Things are all good, but the question is, what about the people who don't have a business in the area?
Exactly.
What about people who aren't going to have any remunerative gains from the event coming to town. The only thing they have for them is traffic. What are you going to do for those people? And noise, right? If people are concerned about noise,
Right.
it's Formula One's job to go to them and say, okay, we've actually had a Grand Prix now. Here are the actual measured noise levels at 1 mile, at 2 mile, in different locations around the circuit. Take that information and take that to the residents and say, this is what the actual acoustic profile of an event is. What else can we do to make it better for you? Because again,
Right.
there's nothing in principle stopping this relationship from being harmonious. It just needs effort. That's really all it is. Yeah.
All right. So you were there. Did you general admission around you? Even if you didn't have general admission, you basically were among seemed like general admission activation. I had a partner who was down there, 2 G's for tickets. I think roughly around $2,000 per. He said he didn't even spend time in the seat. He also walked around as if general admission. How was the general admission for you?
It's ironic because they didn't even announce general admission as being a thing until like a couple of weeks until it was a thing. And the irony actually is that general admission was fantastic. That's the problem, right? So here's the biggest thing about general admission for most places is you walk around somewhere and you have maybe a place to sit here, maybe a place to sit there. But your main concern is not having a permanent place to sit at a race. That's your main concern with GA. That's not a problem in Miami because you have the entire Hard Rock Stadium open to you at any time you want to go to. You want to sit in the stadium and just watch the race on TV, go for it. You want to rock around to the apex of turn 4 and watch, cars cornering at 5G and 170 miles per hour on the entry. You can do that too. If you want to go up the spiral walkways on the corners of the stadium and just look, you go there from an elevated position and look down the track. You can do that too. It was one, and there's so many activities that everyone can get to from the GA areas. It's got to be one of the best GA tickets I've ever seen, and the fact that it wasn't advertised as such is actually a big problem. I think the focus has been so much on this VIP experience, which I'm sure was fine for some people. I'm sure it'd be a great experience for VIPs who were there. But a GA ticket at Miami is probably one of the best things you can have. It's still too pricey for what it is. It still needs to be knocked down a couple $100 per day or for the 2 day or whatever it was for it to really make sense.
I think it was like $576 for 3 days.
Yeah, but it was more than that for many of us. But the point is, it was actually a very, very good experience. And in fact, having the stadium there and the buildings around it and have the track sort of snaking its way through it actually did a lot to improve the acoustics of the event as well. That actually the sound reverberated around the buildings in a way that I hadn't really quite heard before. It made it sound even cooler than it was before. Not to mention the fact that there's all of this extra infrastructure there, electrical systems and lighting and all other things that just made it very, very good. So Miami was actually a phenomenal track for general admission. And it is true that there were stands there, but they really weren't necessary, honestly.
Okay.
So if you want to enjoy the experience. Yeah.
Would Miami be have the same ambiance as a night race?
It could be more. I think it could be more because not only would you get the sparking of the cars flying around and things and the spectacle of seeing them at night, but also just because the race itself is at night doesn't mean events only start at night.
Okay.
Starting the event at night, the actual racing at night means you can have an entire day of just like festival type things. You can have people doing hot laps in a McLaren 720S on the track if you want to. You can do all these things earlier on in the day. It has to get the marshals to be, to help them with that as well. But there are so many things that you can do. And also the heat is just a huge factor. If there was no other reason to have a night race besides just it being cooler, that's honestly enough to do it. Because I think that it was a real challenge for many people. And don't forget, we used to race in Bahrain in the daytime. And for years, we raced in Bahrain in the daytime. And eventually they just said, this is too much. We're not going to do it anymore. Miami is in that same vein, honestly.
Oh, you think so? You put in the same category as that?
I think in terms of the heat that we experienced this past weekend, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it was very, very hot. Yeah.
All right. So in bringing this down, Andretti, what's the deal, man? Like, why is this not something that can be done within the next 3 years? Like, what is going on? Like, what is the holdup? What's
The
the hang up? Should I say, not
people,
the holdup? What's the hang up?
yeah, the people who are not interested in Andretti joining the Formula One grid are being incredibly short-sighted about this. It's kind of seen as this another team that comes in. It just makes each slice of the pie smaller, et cetera, et cetera. What they don't realize is when you have an American team and potentially American drivers, the buy-in will be so much more that the pie itself will get bigger.
Right.
The pie, it may be a smaller slice of the pie, but the pie will actually be bigger.
Right.
And so this idea that there's any kind of restriction to this, this is not William Story and Rich Energy coming in and trying to start a Formula One team again. That's not what it is. If Andretti does not have the pedigree and the history and the means to start a legitimate American Formula One team, then no one does.
Who does? Right.
This is like Penske and all this kind of this. The reaction to this has just been so unsatisfactory as the reasons that have been adduced to try to explain why it's not a good thing for Andretti to join. I literally have not heard a good argument for why they shouldn't join.
Either.
I have not heard it. So as far as I'm concerned, it should happen. This is the right team. This is the right time to have the right drivers in the pipeline. They should make it happen. That's all I have to say about it.
Who do you think his engine supplier will be?
Probably Renault. Probably Renault is who they're working with. Renault does not have a second team right now. Okay. They could really benefit from having a second team to get data from. You could imagine some other version, but I would probably say Renault. Yeah.
Damn, man. How do you feel about the Renault power unit though, bro?
It's not been terrible. I mean, they went to a split turbo this year. They went to a split turbo, and I know there's going to be teething problems associated with that. I mean, Otmar Safnauer thinks they're within 10 and 15 horsepower of the best engine on the grid. So we'll see if they can actually deliver that. The results haven't quite been there yet, but we'll see.
Pleasure.
We'll see. Thank you.
All right, man. Anything that you have coming up that you want to announce? We know you're now going to be in Canada, in which I love Canada, man. I just literally was on a conference call with clients I have in Canada on something totally different, man. But I love Canada. I've been there myself, being in the military. What else would you have coming on that you want people to know? I know at first you were thinking about doing some other things as far as social media, as far as podcasts. I know you do your spaces, man. Let the people know where they can come to get more of Bryson. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I mean, at this point, I might be on Sky again. Who knows? Who knows? I might be on Sky again if that happens. That was actually fun hanging out with Matt and Naomi for a little bit. No, I don't really have anything in the pipeline. I have a lot of work to do in grad school. And I definitely have things that will be keeping me busy. I will try to host the odd space on Twitter now and again. And I do try to make podcast appearances, which I will do. But besides that, no, just I'll be online.
Well, man, I'm going to say this, man. Don't forget about the little people, man. Every now and then when you got conversation, man, talk. Because if Sky Sports is smart, it's almost like you just said, Andretti doesn't have what it takes. Who the hell does? If Bryson Sullivan doesn't have what it takes, who the hell does? That's what I want to know. You need to give me a good name because I can't think of one right now. So, Bryson, I really appreciate you, brother, for joining Wolfpack fam. As always, man, it's been great having you. It always is great having you or even talking to you. I wish you the best in Canada. I wish you the best in your endeavors, in your life, and then you just going up, bro. I just feel you going up from here.
I appreciate the kind words, and thank you for having me on.
Hey, so everybody listen, you can subscribe. You can follow Bryson on Twitter. You can join his spaces. You can come back here for Wolfpack Performance and for Performance Talk. But listen, if you hit the dislike button, just let me know why you hit the dislike button. Maybe there's something I could do to facilitate that. We want to make this a platform for everybody to come that supports different drivers. Talk your crap, talk your shit, just be respectful. And with that being said, we're going to be checking out Performance Talk out. Thanks for tuning in and watching another video here at Wolfpack Performance. Check out some of my other content on Formula One issues, our topics, and our DIY products on how to customize your vehicle. Don't forget to comment, like, share, and subscribe. See you soon.